Joining me now from Washington, D.C., Senator Rand Paul. Senator, thank you so much for joining me.
Glad to be with you.
Now, Senator, is there anything that you support in the $1 trillion stimulus package?
Well, I think it's important for your viewers to know that we don't have any money in Washington. There's no rainy day fund. There's no savings. It isn't like we can walk over to the Federal Reserve and open a big safe and say, oh, there's all this money, this free money, we're going to give it to people. I think it's also a problem that when Republicans begin to act like Democrats and it's a spending frenzy, it's sort of a competition to see who can spend more money, that's dangerous for the country. We've already borrowed $3 trillion this year. We were already $1 trillion in debt just from our annual spending, so that's $4 trillion. Now we're talking about another $1 trillion, but they haven't even started compromising with the Democrats. So the Republican starting position is adding another $1 trillion of debt. It's irresponsible. And I'm starting to become more and more worried about the economy. The stock market, came back, but yet we have this danger now that the Republicans are going to give up and lose lose by historic margins if they keep acting like Democrats. And then what happens to the economy if you have all these governors still keeping the economy closed? So the answer isn't more free money from Washington. The answer is you have to open the economy. The cause of the recession/depression is that governors close the economy down. If you don't open it up and you borrow $5 trillion in dollars, guess what? You could end up a lot worse.
Yeah, the federal deficit is clearly ballooning here, but we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We know that millions of Americans are suffering through no fault of their own. They want to go to work. Most people want to go to work. But then we have, as you pointed out, our state officials, governors, our city councils who are shutting down business and not letting people get back to work. So, this is a phrase we keep saying over and over again, get people back to work. But how do we do that when our health officials say it's not safe to do it? And then we have our state and local lawmakers who aren't allowing it.
Well, you have to look at the facts. And so when people say it's not safe to go back to school, the facts argue otherwise. So the death rate among children under 18 is about 1 in a million. That's safer than the seasonal flu, and we go to school every year with the seasonal flu. People say, well, what about the teachers? Will the kids infect the teachers? Well, the infection rate from children back to adults is very, very rare also. They've done contact tracing studies in China, the Netherlands, Iceland, and England, 4 different countries. And what they find is very rare transmission from children to adults. But even if there was some transmission, we could keep our vulnerable older teachers at home. Those in their mid to late 60s or 70s, maybe they could teach online. But you can't really have school online. There are too many parents who are incapable of doing it. There are parents who don't want to do it. And then there are parents that are single parents and work. How are they going to do it if their kids aren't in school? So we have to open the economy. But the economy is closed because of government edict. So if your governor's closing your economy, we're going to have state legislatures, push back on governors to try to get the economy open again.
Yeah, and pretty much every health expert, doctor that I've talked to agrees with you, but you don't really hear much of their voices on the mainstream media. You only hear the people that want to keep the schools shut down, despite the science, as you pointed out. Earlier today, I heard Senator Ted Cruz talking about how some elected officials, specifically Democrats, are trying to make the coronavirus as painful as possible on the people going into Election Day. Do you agree with him on this?
I think there's an authoritarian impulse in certain leaders. Like we have a Democrat governor in Kentucky, but I call him drunk with power because he's gotten a little power. Now he loves it. He gets to dictate to every restaurant and every public venue in all of Kentucky how many people can come into their venue. We never anticipated anything like that. When we thought of the Soviet Union at its worst, we never thought of a government that could control every aspect of a business. And now we've allowed this to happen. We've also closed all the schools, and to my mind, there's not been one epidemic, not even one sort of a record of contagion within a school, because we closed all the schools down before we got any of it. We don't even know if we're going to have these episodes in schools. One thing we do know, though, is childcare stayed open in New York throughout this. If you were a nurse or a doctor, or you worked in a hospital, or you were a policeman or a fireman, and you were thought to be necessary, the kids of those workers still went to daycare. One daycare, I think the Y had 40,000 kids stay in their daycare over a 4-month period. Guess what the rate of coronavirus was in the daycare? It was like less than 1%. Mortality, way, way less than that. So really, they found that daycare actually was able to stay open through the midst of the worst pandemic. What state did worse than any place in the whole world? New York. And yet the daycare stayed open and were able to survive without really making the problem worse. So these are important things, but nobody is basing their decisions on either scientific evidence or facts. They pretend to be, but it's really the emotions of these are people who believe in big government. They believe in all of us being told what to do. They think they know what's best for us, but they're killing our country. They're crippling the economy.
Senator, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. I remember a few months ago, I went down with the Daily Caller team and we interviewed you about your waste report, and just that the spending that happens in Washington, D.C. is absolutely insane. Now, this really boils my blood. In the stimulus proposal, it includes almost $2 billion in funds for the design and construction of a new FBI headquarters. Why?
Yeah.
We're in the middle of a pandemic.
Because they can. Because both parties are guilty of pork. And I just came from the Republican caucus lunch, and I stepped out and said, I think I'm in the wrong lunch again. I think this is the Democrat lunch. Where are the conservatives? Where are the people who believe that bankrupting the country is a bad idea? But you're right, there's pork stuck in this bill, and they haven't even talked to the Democrats yet. There's $20 billion in big agricultural pork in there. There's another $30 billion for military. Guess what? We spend more on our military than the next 10 countries combined, and that's not enough. We got a chance to add more pork, so there's more pork in there. There's billions of dollars for daycare. When did Republicans start to believe in federal daycare? Most daycare in our country has always been taken care of by private companies. When did we start believing the federal government needs to fund daycare? And they're all saying, well, we can't open up unless there's daycare. Yeah. There's daycare all over the United States. It was taking care of millions of children. The only reason they're not operating is because the governor and big government Republicans have been saying you can't open up. Tell them they can open up again and business will resume and we'll be okay. But printing up and borrowing trillions of dollars is a huge mistake. They're ruining our country, and I fear for what's going to happen when the stock market finally figures out we're $5 trillion in the holes and we're not going to open the economy. Be one thing if this was tiding us over and we're going to open the economy this fall. I'm getting this vibe from Republicans and from Democrats. The economy's not going to open, and we're going to be $5 trillion in debt in the space of 5 months, and it's going to be a disaster. And when Wall Street wakes up to that, Katie bar the door, what's going to happen to our savings if the stock market wakes up and says, guess what? There's not going to be an opening, and there's going to be a ton of debt. That is a bad combination.
Yeah, and Senator, as you pointed out, it's on both sides, this whole giving money away. But you have to think what these lawmakers think about their constituents and the people at home who see, for example, this $2 billion being spent on the FBI headquarters. Like, people must feel bamboozled and scammed by our lawmakers, the very people that we elect. Well, Senator, we're going to have to leave it here. Thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.